It's my great pleasure to welcome one of my favorite writers, Victoria Chang, to Walker. At the outset, I'd like to acknowledge that this event was made possible by the Dan Christmas Memorial Fund. Dan Christmas is a member of the Walker community class of 1997. He loved literature, poetry, and performing arts. Victoria Chang, in my estimation, is one of our very best writers today. And I'm going to run through her professional biography. You'll have to bear with me because she has many accomplishments. Her latest book, and I've got some of her books here, her latest book is his book of poems, With My Back to the World. It was published this year, and it's received the Ford Prize for Best Collection of Poetry. Her previous book, The Trees Witness Everything, was named one of the best books of 2022 by The New Yorker and The Guardian. Her book, Dear Memory, was named a favorite nonfiction book of 2021 by Electric Literature and Kirkus. Obits, her book of prose poems, was longlisted for the National Book Award and named a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle and the Griffith International Poetry Prize. Earlier books of Victoria's include Barbie Chang, The Boss, which won the Penn Center USA Literary Award and California Book Award, Salvini Molesta, and Circle, which won the Crowd Orchard Review Award in Poetry. In addition to her poetry and nonfiction, she has written 2 books for younger children, Is Mommy and Love Love. And in addition to her work as a writer, she's also an accomplished editor. And in this context, to be an editor means someone who is able to select and present the best poems of other writers. And to be the top editor means to be an excellent reader, someone who has read deeply and widely and can discern what makes one poem stand out from many superb others. She is the editor of the anthology Asian American Poetry, The Next Generation, and she was the former poetry editor for the New York Times Magazine. Among her awards and recognitions, she received a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Chowdhury Prize in Literature, and she currently serves as the Bourne Chair in Poetry at Georgia Tech and the Director of Poetry at Tech. I'm going to speak a little bit, that's sort of her professional biography. I want to speak a little bit to why I personally find her work so compelling, and then we'll get started just chatting about your work. So a few words on why I and I imagine so many others hold Victoria Chang's work in such high regard. Maybe a way in is to reference the study group that I've been leading the students and faculty here on Victoria Chang's work. And in the course of our discussions, we've talked about how her work so often achieves what the great English poet John Keats referred to as negative capability. For Keats, negative capability was the quality that distinguished the writing and thinking of our greatest artists like Shakespeare. He defined it as when a writer is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. In other words, a great writer is able to sit with uncertainty, to be able to portray honestly a complex world where one thing contains its opposite, where loss can be devastating and comic and beautiful and crushing all at once. To be able to see the world as mysterious and contradictory without simplifying it. Victoria Chang's work achieves this over and over again. And for me, her work stands out from the field of other poets in several other respects as well. Her writing is incessantly curious about grief, about memory, about identity, solitude, silence, and art. It's unflinchingly honest and courageous. She's unafraid to look directly at what we often wish to look away from, loss and grief and depression. When I say that her work is honest and courageous, part of what I mean is that she's strong enough not to have an answer for life's devastations and mysteries. She looks at loss and grief not as aberrations to be ashamed of, but as inevitable, essential parts of our human experience. Finally, I know a few writers who have the range and drive to experiment that Victoria Chang has. Each of her books stakes new ground. One is a series of letters written to people and things that cannot write back. One is a book of prose poems written in the form of obituaries to people and things she has lost. One is a collection of poems written in strict Japanese syllabic forms called waka, and her latest collection is inspired by the abstract artist Agnes Martin. And Victoria's poems in that collection often take the shape of Martin's grids and squares. So I look forward to spending the next many minutes talking with Victoria to learn more about her and her work, and to show you some of her, and to introduce you to her art. along the way, she's going to read some of her work and probably show you some of her visual art as well. So please join me in giving the warmest of welcomes to Victoria Chang.
Thank you, that was really nice.
Well, welcome. So I think where I want to start is just to think back in time when you were in high school, and I'm curious as to how you saw your future. How important writing was to you at this age. When you looked out at the world, where you saw yourself going, if you had a sense.
Yeah, high school's a long time ago for me, but I have two high school children that are, one's a senior and one's a sophomore, so I kind of know the things that you may all be thinking about. For me, high school was a tough time. I was confused a lot about a lot of things. I was confused about my own identity. I wasn't sure how I fit into my family. My parents were both immigrants. Well, they're both from Taiwan, but my mother was originally from China. So they were raising me based on like a different style of parenting that didn't seem to mesh with all the people in school's parents. So that was confusing to me. And then I went to a school in Michigan that was mostly a white school. I was sort of one of very few Asians in the school, and so I was confused at how I fit into the school as well. So there's a lot going on in addition to just being a kid. So I think poetry for me and reading, and I like to do a lot of other things. I like to play sports too. I play tennis, but I liked to read poems and write poems because it was like the time that I could kind of explore some of those things that I was feeling. So it was really just a way to help myself get through the day sort of thing. In terms of like how I saw myself in the future, I guess I just didn't, because my parents were immigrants, so they were kind of like, you have to find a job and to go make money, and here are a few ideas, of which none were, you can be a writer, or you can be a poet, or even you can be anything in the arts fields. So I didn't even know that this was a possibility. So to end up where I'm now is so shocking and weird. But that's sort of what I was thinking about in high school.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, or tell us a little bit about that path? I think I recall you went towards business for a bit, right?
Yeah, so I don't know, you all probably have things that you always just like to do. For me, I always liked writing, poems particularly, or journaling. It was like the way, my feelings kind of came out through, I liked sports, so I did a lot of athletics to kind of get that energy out, but then like the kind of inside interior soul feelings, I would find myself just sort of writing myself through those things. And so it was sort of threaded throughout my whole life. It was just something that I did to kind of process my life. So in college I took some writing classes. I always wrote, but then I ended up going to business school out of my early 20s because I was good at the quantitative stuff like math, and I liked that stuff too. So a bunch of my friends were just like, hey, you should go do like consulting or banking. So I was like, oh, sure, you just follow what your friends do. So I ended up going to business school and working in like marketing and consulting and banking for a while too.
And while you were doing that, was you turned back towards poetry more?
Yeah, some of that work is fun if you really love it, but then I kind of was like, where's my soul? It wasn't there anymore. It was there, I just couldn't find it. So I found myself feeling sort of unhappy, and so I just kept on writing, and eventually ended up where I am. But it took like a lifetime, so I took a lot of, you think your life is like, some people, actually I know you might know people like that, were like, I want to be a lawyer, and then they just go, and that's literally what they do their whole lives. But for me, it was so circuitous. It's like I liked wandering, I liked doing this, kind of trying that. I was interested. I mean, I'm kind of like interested in lots of things, and I think that's good to. For me, it was good to explore lots of different things and try things out, and then just constantly look at. You know, people are always like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? I mean, I don't think you have to decide today. It can be a process. It was for me, and I always just looked at what I did, like what was I doing, and that helped me say, oh, maybe that's something I like doing, kind of thing.
So when you write, are you driven to write? I mean, is it for yourself, right, or how much are you thinking of like? I think there's this balance of writing can serve one's own soul, and then writing can serve the souls of others.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think like journaling is like for yourself. I mean, hopefully nobody reads your journal, although I'm sure siblings may, but or your parents may. Hopefully they won't violate your privacy, but that could happen. But mostly you're writing for yourself, and then I think if you're making something, you know. Like you're making a piece of art and you're making something to share with other people. So I think those are the differences.
Yeah. Should we read something? Or?
Sure, I can read something. Yeah. So I'll read, and I just have I brought in just a few things to read. So we'll just kind of sprinkle it around and see how you feel. But I thought I'd start with this poem from my book Obit, and content warning, it's about death. And it's my mother died of this disease called pulmonary fibrosis, and it's when your lungs sort of harden for some reason. They can't figure out why, and then the people who have pulmonary fibrosis gradually suffocate to death. It's quite a brutal disease. So I wrote these, I guess they're quote unquote elegies. But they're reinvented elegies, and then they're shape of obituaries. So this one's called My Mother's Teeth. My mother's teeth died twice, once in 1965, all pulled out from gum disease, once again on August 3rd, 2015. The fake teeth sit in a box in the garage. When she died, I touched them, smelled them, thought I heard a whimper. I shoved the teeth into my mouth, but having two sets of teeth only made me hungrier. When my mother died, I saw myself in the mirror, her words around my mouth like powder from a donut. Her last words were in English. She asked for a Sprite. I wonder whether her last thought was in Chinese. I wonder what her last thought was. I used to think that a dead person's words die with them. Now I know that they scatter, looking for meaning to attach to like a scent. My mother used to collect orange blossoms in a small, shallow bowl. I passed the tree each spring. I always knew that grief was something I could smell, but I didn't know that it's not actually a noun, but a verb, that it moves.
I'm going to ask about the choice of writing in the form of an obituary as opposed to an elegy. So for those that are not familiar with an elegy is a kind of an ancient poetic form that typically where you write a poem mourning the loss of someone. But I think you chose here to move into a different form.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always think of what's before, like what happened before us and what existed before us. And, I think of, like my kids are really interested in film and media, which I'm sure a lot of you are interested in. So they are constantly watching old movies, and then they're watching the new movies, and then they're talking about how the new movies are different from the old movies. I think writing is very similar in that, there are old poems. I mean, all the elegies in time, a whole bunch just passed through my head, Whitman, and I feel like when I was writing about my mom, I just didn't want to do what everybody else had done and probably could do better than me, and it's out of context because it's whenever I wrote those, but it's modern, right? So you want to do something that's modern. And so, the idea of the obituary just came around when I was listening to NPR and someone was talking about this documentary they did about obituary writers. And I thought, gosh, when someone dies, literally, I feel like everything dies. Like even, I was thinking about this when I was writing this too, but like my mother and I had like our own world. Like not like my sister and I had her own world with my mother, but my world with my mother was just between the two of us. And the things we talked about, the ways that we talked, the jokes that we shared, everything was just the two of us. And when she died, like our language, even the language we shared with each other evaporated, and then I started thinking, wow, like everything sort of dies, like when someone you love dies. And then I just started writing these poems where like things like, my mother's teeth died. I even have obituaries for myself and other things. I can't even remember what they were, but they're all, appetite, music. So a lot of abstract things too, memory, obsession, stuff like that.
Did you know that you would be writing a collection of these, or did you started and just found the?
Yeah, it just started and it kept going. Yeah.
So I return a little bit to the topic of writing and kind of what writing can do for you, but also just kind of speaking to the room. There are, I imagine there's some students in the room who look at writing with some seriousness as a potential career, but I think the majority of the room probably not so, right? And I would expand it to the arts in general. So I'm interested in what you think of, like, what is the value of creating art, making space in your life for art. Either I think maybe both sides of that, right? To either create it, but also to consume it, or if that's the right word. But other than just entertainment, but to like make room to receive art.
Yeah. I mean, also, if there are any of you in here who want to be writers or artists or musicians or film people, I mean, it's all art, right? Just try it. I mean, you can. There are a lot of people who do these things for a living, even though parents are probably a little frightened by that prospect because the line isn't as straight. But if you really want to do it, I would just encourage you to look into these things and do some research. And also in college, you can minor. So you can always be like, oh, I want to be a business major, but then minor in something that's creative. Or vice versa. You can, major in visual art and minor in business. It's not like you have to be like this monolithic thing where it all contain multitudes, right? And for me, I think, and I teach a lot of tech students at Georgia Tech, which is an awesome school. So apply to Georgia Tech if you like the tech. But we also have literature, media, and communications there. So we teach film and media and all that stuff too. So my classes are usually like 4 students that are in literature, media, communications. So they study all sorts of things. And then the rest of them are like super like technical students. Like half the time, like, what are you studying? I have no idea. Like bio something or another, right? Or engineering. We have a ton of engineers. It's a great school to study all of those things. But the students that I teach are really brilliant young people who want to be doctors and engineers and physicists. I have a lot of physicists in my class, and that is a subject I hated in high school. It was probably my worst grade in high school. But I think it's important, I always tell them that it's like art and poetry, but art in general, I really think, and here's my pitch, it feeds your soul. And if you're making like a widget or like a, I don't know what people study in physics, but if you're a doctor, like whatever you're doing, I feel like if you don't focus on the arts at all in your life, you're gonna be not as good of a doctor as you could have been, because what poetry and art does is it reminds you that like there's a human element to everything that we're here for. And that's what connects us to each other and to ourselves. And I think that, take classes in college, even if it's like, I get a lot of seniors in my classes because they're like, oh, I'm gonna take something that they enjoy finally, or they think it's gonna be an easy A kind of thing. But it's fine, I get them in my the seniors, and then it sort of changes their mindset when they take poetry. They're like, oh yeah, I liked poetry in high school, and it helps them de-stress and think about what's inside for a change versus focusing so much on what's outside.
Should we look at another piece?
Sure.
But,
Yeah. What should I read? Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I
you can
can
talk about some of your visual stuff.
Yeah, let's do that. So I wrote a book called Dear Memory, and it's all in these, does anyone here know what an epistolary is? I'd be amazed if you did. Still looking, no? It's a letter. So it's an epistolary, it's basically a letter. So I wrote a book of like letters, and to just all sorts of people. I had some like bullies in high school. I wrote some letters to them. I had my old teachers in high school. I wrote some letters to them. They essentially became like these kind of lyric essays. And then part of the, I also put some photos in there and found some archival photos of things, like old photos of my mother. So here's one, and my mother is the one on the far right. And then I wrote some little poems, and then I ended up just sort of cutting paper and then putting them on them like kind of like a collage. So I'll just read a few. This one's the one that's showing. I wonder what the hat was trying to cover. The others have flowers on their dresses. All of your flowers were on the underside. Even then, your stare was slightly lower, looking right beneath where happiness begins.
Was this, with this book, was this the first time that you had worked with visual art? Or?
I think so. Yeah. And so what happened was my mother, passed away, and then I had to clean out all her stuff, and then she was a hoarder, so she liked keeping stuff. So I got to see, like, I suddenly knew like my grandparents' names. I suddenly knew where everybody was from. I suddenly knew like my mother had like an American birthday and a Chinese birthday. So I suddenly like found a lot of information. And then I was excited, but then, sometimes the more information you have, the worse off you are. You're like, I want more knowledge, more information, but the more stuff I found, the more questions I had, which was kind of like a weird, interesting paradox. I didn't think that would happen to me. And then I started writing some poems and letters to kind of try and answer some of those questions I had.
And that interest in visual art seems to have continued beyond the book. And,
Yeah.
and your latest collection is engaged with the work of Agnes Martin. And our students, I guess most of our students are probably not familiar with Agnes Martin, but she's an American abstract painter who works oftentimes in large canvases, oftentimes grids, oftentimes bands of color or squares of color. And so you've used that to inspire.
Yeah, and I have some drawings in there too. And when I think talking about high school again, in high school I took a lot of art classes, so I also liked to draw. And I never thought about like, oh, I was going to be a visual artist or anything like that. It was just something that I enjoyed doing, and so I think it comes back later. So yeah, I think just thinking about interests and stuff, people are always like, oh, I'm so sad I don't do this anymore. I feel like you just never know. It can come back later and manifest itself in like really interesting ways. So yeah, I guess I didn't really need to focus as much as I thought I did, and all of my interests ended up coming together at some point.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I took a detour about 10 years as an attorney, and then eventually started writing again, and kind of found my way back to English. So.
Yeah, and it's all kind of like attorney, English, teaching. It's all kind of related. I can see it's all words, lots of words.
Lots of words. The poetry words are are better words. I think,
Yeah.
than
Different
the
words.
different words.
Yeah.
Than the trained words.
Yeah.
So what in terms of your work now, do you think you'll continue to be engaged in sort of combining visual and poetry?
Yeah, I mean, I like working with my hands, you know. Yeah, I was like thinking about, I think a lot about people your age, because I have kids your age, and, you know, like my oldest is applying for colleges this year, and, you know, it's like those essays are such a pain, and it really forces you to think about, like, what do you like to do? Who are you? And so I've been helping her sort of think, like, what kind of person are you? And she's like watching all of you set up, you know, the stage stuff. She's a behind the scenes person. So she and I have talked a lot about, you know, working behind the scenes and doing like filming behind the scenes versus being at the forefront. And I just lost my thought. What was I talking about? Why were we at? You asked me a question.
But sort of if you kind of envision yourself
visual art,
visual and
yeah. Right. So I did a lot of stuff in these most recent books, and for the newest one I'm working on, I've been working with just thread. So I like to use thread because when I was younger, I used to like to sew things. I don't know. Do people sew anymore?
I think so. People
Really?
sew? You guys sew? Any sewers?
Really?
Corey?
Nice. I'm so curious what people are sewing. What are you sewing?
I want to work on denim primarily, but
Fashion.
also like just regular clothes and stuff. I wanted to start trying to make shoes in some way.
Denim and shoes. Fashion. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Right? Like this stuff is everywhere. You can just use it to make whatever you want with the materials that you have. But I used to love sewing. Just things, like putting things together, making things. And so now in some of my artwork that I'm working on, I'm using red thread and needle and sewing them through my palms and in kind of interesting ways. And Pinterest, I don't know who likes to look on Pinterest, but I love going on Pinterest. Do y'all know what Pinterest is? Yeah. Sorry. I roll. I love Pinterest because there's a lot of cool stuff on there and it's very inspiring. So, so I'm doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Let's look at some more of your work.
What do I feel like reading?
What do you think? Yeah, I mean,
You know, I'll read some of these short ones.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I don't know if I don't think I brought them
Maybe not be on the
because they're so small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So y'all know what a haiku is, right? What are the syllables of a haiku? Yeah, good. So it's fun to use syllables. Like sometimes I write and it's like you look at your paper or computer and I don't know how to start. Once you start though, it's really fun. So for me, I have trouble starting sometimes, and so sometimes I give myself these little, I think of them as like bumpers on bowling. Well, I don't know, maybe adults aren't supposed to use bumpers, but I still do, because then, you know, it doesn't go in the gutter. But these are bumpers for my writing, and I have syllabic, so they're syllabic, so you count syllables, right? And so I wrote a bunch of tiny short poems where there are specific syllables that are based on like really ancient Japanese poetry, you know, during the court time. I'll just read a few of these, and they're so small, so they're short. This one's called, and I also used a poet's titles. So there's a poet named W.S. Merwin who had these really open, capacious titles that were just fun to like as a writing prompt. This one's called To Age. When the stars hit the windows now, they turn into flies. Who knew they would come down? That's all. This one's called Fly. What happened to the eagle that lost its wing and lived in this small cage, feral like silence? We stood there with our futures, filming with our phones. I wonder if the bird felt me replay it on the plane. The river of bees. There are no more bees. Remember how they glided? Don't worry, they are not dead. They have flown past death. There they walk on two legs, build their hives out of concrete. calling late. The men used to call at all hours, but what I miss most are the late night talks, ones where I held the phone so close it pressed like a gun. Little soul, I rode on your back until your knees broke, and now 1 mile left, I must toss you. I'll just read a few more of these. When the war is over, I once saw the deer. They were all wearing blue scarves. We have finally finished killing everything. We are now looking ahead, but have killed past the future. Turning. My mother is dead. The lemons still turn yellow. The trout still stare emptily. Desire is still free. We still love many people, eat peaches as if kissing. The gods. The fact that leaves can't be put back on trees makes me think that you do not exist.
So I might ask a little bit about your writing process and habits. How does a poem happen for you? What's your way into a poem?
I don't know, I feel like it's probably the way that we all think about things. I mean, like right now, I bet you every single person in this room is obsessing about something. Or someone, or some situation, something that happened, something in the future. Like I feel like that's where my poems come from. Those kinds of obsessions that we have, some memory that we had of something that happened in the past. A lot of poems start as love poems, right? Which is a form of obsession. And then a lot of poems are talking about anxiety about the future or the past, memory, those big topics, truth, beauty, love, death. I think those are all the places my poems come from.
Yeah, I think there's a certain quality with writing. I think within one writer, but also you look at writers in general, they write about the same topics over and over again. But it's I think some of that is that the language never quite hits all of it.
Right.
There's whatever you write about, there's more there, right?
Yeah.
The thing that is driving that obsession oftentimes is going to drive you to write another poem.
Right. I mean, language is failure. It doesn't really ever get at what we're trying to say exactly, but if I can get, as a writer, like a centimeter, 1 inch, a foot away from what it is that I'm feeling inside, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's the making of art, is trying to get at what is happening in the interior world. We spend so much of our time, I think, in the exterior world with each other, outward bound. I feel like writing for me is that quiet place where you can actually flip things around and look inside and ask yourself, who are you and what are you thinking about? What's on your mind? What's in your heart and soul?
Yeah, and I think you and I talked a little bit about that before we got started, about just the way that the page in front of you allows you to sort of explore something in language, to say something that is very difficult to do to the people around you in ordinary life.
Right.
Sort of
We're busy.
Maybe it's a form of concentration or a form of you're always holding the attention of the blank page.
Right. And especially at your age, when you're all like, your schedules are packed and you're just running from one thing to another every single day, there's not a lot of capacity to pretty much sit down and just say, hey, like what am I feeling right now? And even I think when I've seen young people interact today, it's like, I see people like my own kids like talking to their friends, and it's like a lot of yapping, right? But like, what are you feeling when you're not talking to your friends about how you're feeling? And we each have these very rich interior lives. It's like a whole world in there. And I think we should try and spend as much time as we can with ourselves in that world.
We've got a few minutes left. Maybe we can go for questions. We'll see if there's questions, and if not, we can always look at another poem.
Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions? We also speak loud, because I don't think
I can repeat it. Oh, good.
Do you have any like writers or medias or things that inspire your writings besides yourself? Like, do you look to other people for inspiration?
Do you mean like dead writers or contemporaries? Anything?
Anybody.
Anything.
Really?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question, because I think it's important to find your family tree. And I always talk to writers, artists, people, like, who are you, like, think of yourself in like a family tree somewhere. Who's behind you or before you? And who are you influenced by? Who are you inspired by? So like, if you're interested in fashion, like, who are all the people around you that are alive that you're really inspired by? But who are the people who are not around anymore in the past that inspire you? And so I think that is a great question. Like, thinking about that is helpful for you as you sort of chart your path forward in life. For me, like, I love like poets, dead poets like Elizabeth Bishop. So I really love the image. So I like to think about things through like looking. Like, I have trouble. So when I was reading poems to you, it's hard. Like, I would be sitting there having a hard time paying attention because I tend to like to look at something. So I'm a visual person, so I like the image. So poets like Elizabeth Bishop. I love Sylvia Plath. I don't know, does anyone read Sylvia Plath? Yeah, kind of. I love modern poets like Richard Siken, who wrote this incredible book called Crush. Has anyone read that? Some of you have. Yeah, Richard Siken is an amazing poet. There are some younger poets I really admire, like, the contemporary poets, that, like, so many, Dennis Smith, Chen, they're everywhere, Kava Akbar. And there's a lot of young writers writing today that inspire me to kind of try new things and push myself. And then there are a whole bunch of dead poets I love, like T.S. Eliot even. Some of them have problematic histories, like it's hard to say you like Walt Whitman today, but there are things I admire about his poetry. Virginia Woolf, obviously, innovative, fresh, stuff that if you think is like written hundreds of years ago that you still connect to today, that's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Courtney? Or Natalie?
You read quite a few of your poems in class in Lang, and your work is clearly immensely personal. Is it at all difficult for you to release that to the public eye when you gain so much from that personally?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the fun thing about being a writer and artist is that you can also have a persona. So, like, things that I write about are so personal, and it's definitely like how I feel at a particular moment. But sometimes I like over dramatize things, or I make things. You can also, like, you're making a sculpture. Think about it that way. And so you can make the sculpture look like what you're feeling, or like a person, or kind of, it could be an abstract sculpture. So for me, yes, it is very, like, all my work is very, recently at least, actually all of it probably is personal. Even when it's historical and dealing with politics or race or things like that, it's very personal at the end of the day. And I had to kind of reckon with like being seen, because no one plans on like talking to people about your poetry or things that are so personal, and no one expects to have to do that. And we're talking about being introverts, and I think a lot of artists and writers can be very introverted, so it has been difficult. But I don't know, I think it's more valuable to share in the end, because it's like I'm reaching out a hand, and maybe somebody else who might feel similarly might be like, they might grab my hand through my poem, and that's, I think, more valuable in the end.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll stop there. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention.
Let's also thank Mr. Hayden for making all this happen.
Chang, take it away.